For those of you who may not be familiar, the NPDA supports franchised and independent powersports dealers through education, advocacy, programs, and practical resources, all focused on helping dealers build a stronger, more professional, and more profitable industry. The Partner Webinar series gives dealers direct access to the companies, tools, and people helping shape the powersports retail landscape, with one goal in mind: keeping dealers informed, connected, and exposed to ideas they can actually put to work. Today's webinar focuses on consumer data privacy, dealership compliance, and how dealers can turn a growing regulatory burden into a practical business advantage. As more customer activities moves through the websites, lead forms, advertising platforms, CRMs, and other digital systems, dealers are handling more consumer data than ever before. That creates risk, but it also creates an opportunity to build trust and strengthen the customer experience. We're joined today by Matt Vatter. I cannot speak today. We're joined today by Matt Vatter and Boyd Stough from Accelerate to Compliance. Matt brings deep experience in governance, risk compliance, information security, and enforcement, including prior work with the Minnesota Department of Commerce. Boyd is an attorney, consultant, veteran, HUA, and data privacy advocate who helps business navigate the increasingly complex world of consumer privacy and compliance. Together, Matt and Boyd are going to walk us through where dealers may be exposed, how privacy rules affect dealership websites, lead handling, marketing, and customer data systems, and what dealers can do to immediately help reduce risk, improve transparency, and turn compliance into a competitive advantage. Please drop your questions or comments in the Q&A, and as we make it through this presentation, we will either squeeze those into the conversation, or I will work through a list of those at the end of this presentation. With that, I'll go ahead and turn things over to Matt and Boyd.
Hey, Mark, thanks. It's great to be with everybody. Interesting that we've got three veterans sitting in front of you today doing this. I know that, I'm a retired Army guy. Boyd, I'm not sure what service you're in. Mark, I believe you were the Army as well, weren't you?
Air Force, Chair Force,
Air Force.
Chair
There
Force.
you go.
So two ex-military and a civilian.
There you go. So we'll make sure that the vocabulary that we used to use is, I was an infantryman, does not creep into the presentation today. So as Mark was talking about, the environment that we have from a privacy perspective, from an information security perspective, from a cybersecurity perspective, information is becoming incredibly more difficult to navigate. There are vastly more roadblocks with the integration of AI on both the defense side and on the attacker side. It's getting incredibly complicated and incredibly complex to put the right defenses in place, for one, to protect yourself against bad actors, and for two, to make sure that you're doing the things that you need to do to keep the federal government and state government kind of out of your operations and not mucking up the waters by not doing something that they expect you to do and putting your business at risk. Recently, you've probably seen actions or read about things. The CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, and the CPRA, which is their regulatory body that enforces their privacy laws, fined Honda Motor Corporation $625,000 for violating California's privacy rights, right? It's, to a multi-billion-dollar company, $625,000 might not seem like a ton of money, but think about all the things that come along with just the fine, right? Now there's the entire operation has to regenerate the way that they handle their digital information systems and how they manage and transmit in private data. So Amtrak was recently hacked. I don't know if you knew that, but a group called Shiny Hunters attacked Amtrak, and they also attacked there's what the heck is the name of the company? Infinite Campus is the name of the other organization that they just recently hacked, and that resulted in over 20 million consumer records being compromised, on dark web sites. And then you've all heard about and you guys will have a webinar next week that's going to talk about the FTC actions of recent letters that were sent to automobile dealerships about another portion of engaging with clients. So each one of these pieces that I just talked to you about, and I'm going to share a screen and we'll kind of get a little bit talk a little bit more about this here, is is talking about a one second here. There we go. Is talking about why this can be such a complex issue to deal with, right? And it all has to do with, this is not working the way that it did during the rehearsals, but here we go.
There we go.
Okay. So every piece of this talks about a different category in which we need to think about. So privacy rights, compliance, cybersecurity, information security are all separate and individual aspects, but they come together. They can't be separated. And I like to term this as the convergence of cybersecurity and compliance, or security and compliance. And what's kind of a common theme to all of these is securing, managing, and tracking of consumer private data, of company private data, of interactions that you're having in the digital sphere to manage and run your business. So if you think about each of these as an individual component, it can be overwhelming. But if you're putting the right policies, procedures, practices, and processes in place, and you're partnering with the right people who bring a certain level of expertise in, all of this can be brought into a more manageable sphere for your business. And one of these aspects, and one of them that's probably going to be an emerging concern for most businesses as we move forward into 2026, is the area of privacy rights management and how you kind of engage at the point of the spear with your consumers in that first step. And that's why Accelerate to Compliance and Privacy Pillar, who Boyd represents, partnered, because we saw this as being one of those areas where our client base really needed some help and some understanding, and in a very straightforward and open way to address the issues at hand. And that's why we've got Boyd with us today. So Boyd, why don't you kind of take over and walk through what you have to share with the group today?
Absolutely. So I'll share my screen and we'll get this presentation started. Here we go. We'll do the whole slideshow and from today's slide. There we go. So I think everybody can see my screen. And today I'm going to talk about from risk to revenue. Now, we don't really talk about how the idea of managing risk is actually an opportunity to really to make more money. But it's really about framing. I'm an attorney. I'm a consumer data privacy attorney. I've given the CLE, the continuing legal education for the DC bar for the past few years on this subject. And the conversation has really turned from what do we have to do to stay out of trouble to how can we leverage the direction, the trajectory of things to be more intelligent about how we're leveraging our data to make more money, which everybody here, I'm sure, is really all about. Okay. So that's my job today, is to kind of help you kind of understand, is to help reframe this whole concept for you. Okay. So the reactive posture. Now, nobody in business is ever going to do really well, right, if they're purely reactive in their posture. But you're in the business, you're a Powersports dealership owner or manager, or you have some meaningful function within that world. You're there, you show up every single day in order to sell. That's what you're there to do. Let's understand and appreciate that you have very little bandwidth. You don't spend your time thinking about this. You can't possibly begin to wrap your head around it. And even if you did, it would change tomorrow in a way that would kind of, would move things around for you, make it difficult. So instead of having a posture of what's the least amount that we could do at any given time in order to stay out of trouble, let's change our thinking to how do we earn better permission? Because there's real power in permission. Okay? So, all right. So move from a defensive checklist to a permission-based customer strategy. I've been on calls for the past couple of weeks, in fact, with some big companies. And would you believe it? The conversation is not so much about what's the least that we have to do. It's help us understand what data we're collecting, where's that data going, with whom are we sharing and selling that data possibly, right? What can we do with this data? How can we clean this data up and manage it better in order to be able to more effectively reinvest that intelligence, okay, into our business? All right, so just kind of a 101. Every marketing dollar creates a data event, okay? The moment the growth engine works, customer data starts moving across the systems and vendors. Now, here's something we've learned through experience, is that most of you probably aren't completely aware of where the data goes. And you say, well, no, we know where it goes, and it goes into our systems, and we use these systems, these different systems for these different purposes. But you may not be aware of where those systems are then sending the data, how they're using the data. And there's something I want to make you aware of. These laws put the onus on you. As the originator of data to this ecosystem, any misuse of that data downstream can be tied back to you. So it's really important that you understand who you're working with whom they're sharing information, et cetera. Okay. But there's some limits to what you're capable of doing in that respect. So let's acknowledge that, and let's look to some basic principles here, right? You spend money. Somebody comes to your website, you capture leads, it ends up in systems, and it shows up, right, hopefully as revenue if it's effective marketing dollars spent. But there's a very important correlation you have to understand, that the more customers, okay, the more people come to the website and providing their data or, right, being tracked, right, the more liability or the more enterprise value, right? You could say, well, it's both. It's about framing. How do you think about your posture? How do you think about how you're interacting with the customers and respecting or not respecting their rights and their choices? If you see it as something that you have to do and you want to do as little of it as possible because you want to maximize your marketing ROI, you're thinking kind of just one layer deep, okay, you're going to end up probably getting in trouble, and certainly you're not going to be realizing the value of these interactions. If, on the other hand, you say, you know what, we're going to lean into a relational dynamic with our customers. We're going to lean into getting their permission, not thinking of it so much as in technical sense or legal sense as consent, but we want to let them know that we care about them and we respect their rights. And we want to demonstrate that to them. You're going to forge a more effective dynamic with the customer. And then it becomes a question of what do you do with that downstream? So we all understand, right, that one person ends up, their data can end up in so many different places across this ecosystem, right? A normal shopping journey can trigger tracking, okay? So come to your website, you've got some scripts running in the background. The point is you want to capture some information for them, be able to retarget them. PI collection, personally identifiable information, that's what PII is, okay? Vendor sharing, again, in many cases, you may not really be aware with what you're sharing with what vendors. It's incredibly important that you develop that awareness. Retargeting, which we kind of addressed earlier, and then rights obligations. So the takeaway here is that the journey may be ordinary, but the data flow is not automatically, and I've got this blocked out here, automatically compliant. You need to understand, everybody in your organization really does need to understand how data comes into the organization, how it flows through the organization, and where they exist in that workflow, where they exist in that data flow, okay? Because certain responsibilities are assigned to that. And again, it becomes an opportunity to think about optimizing those relationships, optimizing those touch points, right, to maximize the value of the data that you end up collecting. So there are 3 obligations that dealers need to operationalize. Now, this is very high level. So you understand too that in the United States, kind of a 101 here. In the United States, the rules are jurisdictionally based, right? They're all state-based. We do not yet have a federal framework. Now, that may very well be coming, and we all need to be thinking about that. You should be preparing for that now. But in the United States, as opposed to in Europe, okay, in the United States, with regard to cookies, okay, website tracking of cookies, where there is a legislation in place, or where that legislation would be triggered because you're interfacing with a customer from that jurisdiction, okay, it is called default opt-in. Now, this default opt-in means that when people come to your website, okay, the assumption is that if they don't exercise their right in any other way, they don't say denial or manage their rights and their choices in a nuanced manner, that they've assented, okay, to the running of these scripts right, to being tagged and tracked and retargeted, etc. Okay, but here's the trick: that cookie banner is really there to inform them if you do not provide them with an opportunity to know, and if that opportunity to know is not accurate, meaning it is not an accurate reflection of how you run your business, what you're doing, what you're using to collect that information, how you're using that information, etc. No matter what choice they make, right? It's null and void. You do not get to enjoy the rights associated with the authority over that data that would be associated with having collected that consent. Okay. So having that banner in place and making sure that that banner is what we call globally compliant and jurisdictionally sensitive is very, very important. Okay. It's PII and sensitive data.
Hey, Boyd.
Yeah. Yes. Go ahead.
And just to clarify, right now you are primarily talking about Europe and some of the other areas. So, or
No,
this is
no. So unlike in Europe, where it's a default opt-out standard, meaning that people have to exercise, they have to actually affirmatively assent to the capture of their data before anything's ever done. Okay, in the United States, it's default opt-in. In every jurisdiction, it's default opt-in, but it presupposes that what you've done is you have made them aware. Okay, you've given them an informed opportunity, right, to make a decision.
Thank you.
Okay, make sense? Okay, now PII and sensitive data, that's different. Okay, now PII and sensitive data aren't the same thing, right? PII can become sensitive data when certain data is provided. Now, in most cases, on your bleed forms and things like this, you're not going to be bleeding into sensitive data. But here's the trick: when you're capturing data, what data you capture has to be consistent with the reason that information is being collected. Okay, so a normal example that we see is, let's say you have a contact form. Now, as a customer, okay, I believe that I'm providing my information for you to contact me, right? Not to use that information for marketing purposes, not to use that information for other purposes. You need to disclose to the customer why you're taking this information and how else you might be using it. If you do that, you can get into, if you misuse that information, or if you use that information in a manner that's inconsistent with what was disclosed or what was conveyed, right, you can get in some serious trouble, right? So you want to make sure you've got some tools for addressing that. And then we have data subject access requests, okay, or consumer rights. This is not so complicated, really. The data subject is the subject of the data. So that would be the customer, right? And an access request is a request to access the data, right? To understand how you're using that data, what information you have on them. They may submit a change request to that data, or they may ask, and this is the more popular option, they may ask to delete that data, okay? And you need to have a process in place to be able to respond in a timely manner to those data subject access requests, lest you run into some trouble with the relevant states attorneys general. Okay, and we've actually had a number of folks end up settling. Don't know that that was the wisest move, but they ended up settling, some cases, some lawsuits, which probably didn't really even have standing. But again, you're a dealership and you just want to kind of get rid of the problem, right? So people are starting to avail themselves of opportunities to cause trouble. Let's put it that way, because they can go and see in your privacy policy, do you have an opportunity for somebody to submit one of these requests? If you don't, their operating assumption is that you don't have a data consent management operation in place. Okay, so that's a kind of a nutshell there. Now, next, here's where we're going to dispel kind of a big, bad, really harmful kind of idea out there, which is that we are a dealership and we don't need to comply with these state laws because, GLBA. GLBA, Gramm-Leach-Bliley, applies to financial workflows. Okay, so when at the point that somebody enters into the workflow where they're starting to provide information for the purposes of advancing financing, right, or a purchase, then Gramm-Leach-Bliley applies. But all the way up until that point, okay, with regard to all of your marketing, your analytics, retargeting, the chat, lead capture, all of that, actually, that is governed by the relevant state consumer data privacy laws and a smattering of other laws, right? So it's not as simple as, does the state have a consumer data privacy law in place or does it not? Because some of those provisions actually might be found in some of the other states' regulations. Okay, so practical question is, what data, what purpose, and what consent choice, and what vendors are involved, right? And it has everything to do with which workflow is, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about the marketing, the initial capture of that information, the interfacing with them for the purpose of ultimately advancing the sale or advancing the actual purchase, okay? So next, right? Now this is where we're getting into understanding the value of your data, okay? This is, again, we want to reframe this for everybody to start thinking about, if we're spending money getting data, how can we optimize the use of that data? Okay? Understand this. Now, if you don't get the proper consents, is the data clean? Probably not, right? Downstream, might you be required kind of retroactively to demonstrate that you have the consent of the customer? Very possibly, right? So it's a good idea to start making these good decisions now and thinking more intelligently about how you're managing this information, so that downstream, right, you have rights to the data, authority over the data, so that you can maximize the ROI on that data downstream. So with respect to your banner, now this is something we see all the time. A consumer will come, they'll see the banner, they'll exercise their choice, they'll say opt out, right? And still these pixels will run, right? The scripts will run, right? Their option wasn't respected. You captured consent, right? Or you didn't capture consent. It didn't really matter what happened, because at the end of the day, the solution is non-functional, right? And so you don't end up getting the benefit at all of compliance because your solutions aren't functional. We're seeing this alarmingly frequently, right? And that's because these clients, not understanding how any of this stuff works, not thinking proactively about the capturing of the data, all right, are simply relying on somebody to come in, set up a banner, and think it's kind of a one and done. And it couldn't be any further from the truth. Okay? So use case matters more than the form field. Dealership websites collect personal data in many ordinary pre-sale and service interactions, right? Lead forms, trade-in tools, so on and so forth, right? The compliance question is not, do we collect data, but what kind of data, for what purpose, under what permission, and where does it go? Okay? And the goal here is to maximize meaningful permission, as we're going to kind of get into in just a second, right? For purposes of maximizing the value of that data, not minimum disclosure. Instead of trying to avoid doing what you need to do in order to maximize that kind of layer one value of your marketing dollars, right? Think more proactively about the downstream value of capturing permission, okay? So we've talked about data subject access requests, right? When a customer asks what you have, where it went, where you will delete, or what you will delete, the workflow has to answer. Like I was saying before, there's exposure associated with, I'm a lawyer, and nobody likes lawyers, and I can understand that, right? But what lawyers do is they look for one simple piece of evidence, okay, that will demonstrate to them that you don't actually have a good operation in place. They're going to look to your privacy policy, and they're going to look to see if you have the ability to capture requests and answer requests. And they're also going to look to your banners and things like this. And then they're going to respond with, right, I'm going to assume this person doesn't have a process in place. Let's go ahead and now stress test this and see if we can find some flaws, right, and ultimately cause some trouble, right? So most privacy failures are not legal theory failures. They're inventory, routing, ownership, and vendor management failures. In other words, you don't have an understanding of what data you're capturing, where that information is going, how it flows, right? And you don't have a process in place for being able to manage interactions with the customer with respect to that data, wherever it might exist within your ecosystem. So if you cannot map your data flow, you cannot configure compliance. The website, the privacy notice, the consent tool, so on and so forth, right? They must describe the same reality. This is why it's so important. Again, I want to reframe this for you. If you were thinking about your dollars spent on getting the data, and you were thinking beyond just that one transaction, you were thinking about the value of that information in aggregate over time, you would have a really good idea of how that data flowed through your organization. Okay, you would understand all of the touch points, you would understand all of the different stakeholders implicated, and then you would be looking to optimize every single touch point, especially, right, the touch points with the customer, in order to maximize the value of that information, to enrich the relationship with the customer, right, in order to extract the most amount of dollars from them, and hopefully maybe somebody they'd refer, and make better decisions from a business perspective about who to target, and ultimately grow your business. Permission changes the quality of the data. That's the cleanest statement possible when it comes to the value of the data. So many of the clients that we have, the bigger clients that we have, they're not so much focused on how do we avoid issues. They're more interested in how do we get the cleanest possible data, because the cleanest data is the most valuable data. You guys throw a lot of money in marketing, right? It makes no sense that you wouldn't have this kind of posture, right? So ambiguous data is fragile, it's noisy, right? It's just signal, as we like to say. It's not structured, it's not intelligence, okay? Consent to data, we're getting there. It's cleaner signal, right? It's a clear purpose. You have now authority provided to you by these laws. You have authority over the data to do certain things to and include even commercialize that data, right? Sell that data, right? But when you use permission in order to develop a more robust relationship with the customer, this is what the biggest players are doing. Please hear me loud and clear. This is what the biggest players are doing. They are using permission as an opportunity to enrich the relationship with the customer. And in doing that, they create relational data, which compounds over time. Trust produces deeper engagement, okay? So weak operators extract, right? And strong operators earn. Very, very important distinction. And you have to make a decision pretty well today, which one do you want to be, okay? Permission compounds the species and value of data. When the relationship deepens, customers reveal richer, more durable signals over time. This is the shift. Don't think, what's the least we can do? Think, how can we maximize the value of the data? And maximizing the value of the data is a function of maximizing the relationship with the customer. Lean into permission gathering as a first touch point and ultimately leaning into a relationship with the customer, a recursive relationship where you're constantly deriving not just, you see here, the species of data. One of the interesting things we've learned is that the more intelligent companies, the bigger companies that are leaning into this, what they're learning is that they can develop insights that were never ever available to them before because they were avoiding that relationship. Okay, when they lean into the relationship, now they can actually give rise to whole new species of data, which open up whole new opportunities. Okay, and here's the deal. Value delivered equals trust earned, better disclosure, better personalization, more value delivered, and it's a feedback loop, right? The more value that somebody derives from the interaction, the greater the likelihood that they're going to lean into that, back into that relationship and be willing to provide more and valuable information back to you. So the permission flywheel, right? Trust, permission, clean data, better experiences, growth. And growth is very broad, right? When we say better experiences, that's a better dynamic with the customer, a better dynamic. I want to share just really quick with you. This has come up multiple times now, in even just the last week, and I couldn't put my finger on exactly why, but why the timing of it all. But people are starting to really understand that when I am intentional about, there's an old adage that says iteration is not innovation, right? Merely iterating on your processes isn't enough. Think innovatively about the kind of relationship you could have with your customer if you would lean into capturing their permission, demonstrating trust, right? And what novel ways might you interact with them to derive novel data? That novel data is then reinvested in growth. And this is how you get a competitive edge over your competition, okay? So in closing, the future belongs to dealers who earn the most permission. I don't expect everybody on this call is necessarily just going to get that. It's not going to hit you straight away, probably. But what I'd ask you to do is to think about this, right? That compliance protects the business, permission powers a business. The biggest businesses are leaning into this for a reason, okay? The goal is to market smarter with controls that protect and grow your business by respecting your customers. Okay, start leveraging your customers more intelligently, and that really does start with permission. Yes, you're going to check all the compliance boxes. Yes, you're going to stay out of trouble. Yes, you're going to be able to breathe easy, but you are not realizing the value of this if you're not thinking innovatively about how to lean in to create a more relational dynamic with your customers, okay, which is always going to be founded on the trust that is derived from their having given you right? Not you're having taken, not having you're having tricked them into, but they're having freely given you permission to enter into that relationship. Okay. Of course, if anybody has any questions, they can always reach out to Howard and Matt at Accelerate to Compliance. This information's here. My understanding is that all of you will have access to this recording as well as possibly the deck. And we're always here to answer all of your questions. Last thing I'll say is this. This whole team always leans in with education. We're never ever going to sell you something you don't need. We want to understand you and help you understand what's really required and what the opportunities are before you are asked to ever make a decision about anything. So we're here for you. We welcome any all questions you ever have. Thank you.
You have anything else to add, Matt?
No, I just appreciate Boyd's perspective on this, having worked with him now for probably a little over a year in our relationship, and watching him with customers. It's very nice to see a lawyer actually think first about informing and educating rather than trying to be right. So, Boyd, thank you for that. This is important stuff. We've seen over the course of time a greater level of understanding, and we're starting to get more and more folks that do understand that these types of things, and Boyd's key point of turning a cost into an investment in your business is really kind of that mindset. And you see that by attending to some of these things and creating the processes, creating the procedures, getting the right information, not because you've tricked it out of somebody, but because they generally want to provide that to you because they want a better experience with your dealership, really is the nature of where this is going. And if you can be in front of that process rather than being run over by it, you will have that competitive advantage that Boyd talked about.
Hey, Matt, you like all the other partners have agreed to make this partner series of webinars informational. So, it's not just a product pitch for individual companies, but I would come out and be honest with everyone and tell you that, I'm a client of Accelerate to Compliance. Our dealership has worked with A2C for the last couple of years. I've got a great rep. I think I've had the same rep for a couple of years, which I can't really say that about many of the other companies that I work with. He does a great job of following up and doing what he says he's going to do and supporting us. But can you quickly kind of at a high level talk about some of the services that A2C offers?
Sure. Our primary area of responsibility is compliance with the FTC safeguard rules. That's kind of the foundation, right? That's where we start. So Boyd had talked about this as well. It's like compliance is a foundation. This is the gotta do in your business, right? The federal government, state government says you need to do this. That's compliance. And that's where we come in, as we try to make that process of compliance with federal regulation as easy and as straightforward as possible. From there, what we do is our approach is we're not going to dump the entire suite of possible solutions on you at one time. Our philosophy is you really need to implement the things that you're comfortable and familiar with and that which you understand. So we always seek to develop that understanding in our relationship and build over time. Our philosophy is this is a journey, not a destination. So we're going to help you along the way. So we can do basic FTC compliance. We can do managed detection and response from a technical side of the house. We can help you with monitoring dark web threats so you can find out immediately whether or not your information has been compromised. And that's important because the nature of digital information is it's just not the stuff that you physically have, but it's all of those different relationships. As Boyd had said, your downstream distribution of information doesn't just happen with you, it happens everywhere. And if one of those nodes happens to be compromised, cyber criminals can track that data back and use it to affect your organization. So the faster you can understand that that's happening, the better off you are. We also have a really good suite of training tools, from basic information on the blocking and tackling basic cyber hygiene, information security, best practices, things of that nature, all the way into simulated phishing and phishing training types of programs. So we work with dealerships to meet them where they're at and help to put together that roadmap to progressively increase understanding, increase defensive strengths, and build a program that works best for your dealership and for your people.
When I worked at Spader, we probably 4 years ago, we hired a company to start doing some penetration testing of the operation. And, early days, the number of people who failed those phishing attempts it was a scary number, but, that process over time, I think the employees there really got good at identifying not only, the testing, but also the real ones. And I still I manage a part of the internet at our business. And, today we're seeing 50 to 100 phishing attempts a day that are hitting our employees. It's from the crazy stuff like our office manager getting email requests for, can you change the direct deposit information on my bank account because I'm changing banks, that not being real, and people pushing for sending ACHs. We're getting fake emails from almost every manufacturer stating that they are moving to a new bank and they would like us to start paying our bills with this new ACH number. I mean,
Right.
it's overwhelming, the number of those that we receive on a daily basis.
Yeah, and the use of AI tools from the hacker's perspective to where I can clone voices, where I can clone websites, where I can very easily generate fake documentation that looks almost exactly real, is making it easier to do it. And because of the way the network is designed, the I don't have to focus a great deal of time and attention on one thing. If I'm a hacking group, I can spray that really, really deep. And as soon as I can find a weak spot, then I can exploit that weak spot. And that's what there's a group out there now called Shiny Hunters, and it's a disparate group of hackers that kind of share intelligence and share methodologies. And they're really, really good at making you think there's somebody that you know. And then they don't hack into your system. You give them credentials to get into the system. So then, your Sentinel One or whatever you might be using as a endpoint monitoring tool is irrelevant because your system thinks it's me who has credentials, authorized credentials, is now in the system doing things that I've been given permission to do naturally, but it's not me. So this is that next level of understanding that needs to be made aware within dealerships is okay, if you get a phone call, you have my permission to put it on hold, stand up, walk across the show floor, and ask me if I'm actually making the phone call. So that's kind of the direction we're going, and that's where these next level of training programs become really important for your staff.
I have a marine dealer that I work with, and only in hindsight did they discover that they had had somebody who had been in their network for months at this point in time. And that individual actually followed a sales transaction that went on for 11 weeks. And at the very end of that transaction, when the salesperson sent the customer wire transfer instructions on where to send the $1.3 million, that person inserted themselves into that conversation, switched out the ACH information, and $1.3 million was sent to a criminal. And there really was no way to get that money back. So, and they did not have enough insurance to cover that transaction.
Yeah.
So happens all the time. I don't want Boyd to think I'm picking on you today, but I gotta
You
say
can pick, man.
My other favorite attorney joke is that 99% of attorneys give the other 1% a bad name.
That's accurate. That's accurate. Yeah. It's accurate. This is one of the reasons why I'm in this business and not the other business, 100%.
Well, we appreciate that. Hey, all right. So, some questions for you. Got a little list of them, and if anybody else has any, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. Philip, I saw your hand go up, but I can't actually see you on here. So, if you have a question, if you want to drop that in Q&A, I'll be sure to get it answered as well. But and this really comes out of me working with a lot of different dealers across the country. Um, I think a lot of dealers have tried to simplify their operations. So they do things like not requiring MFA or allowing employees to set easy passwords or password sharing. It's a pain in the butt to set every one of your employees up with an account with BRP or Polaris or Kawasaki. So they just got a couple of accounts that they use, and everybody is sharing those passwords. And then, because so many people are sharing them, they make the passwords really easy. How does a dealer find that middle ground between being easy versus being safe and secure?
Um, Good point. I think password management, password security is probably one of those very first things to engage in. And I would encourage everybody to consider this thought process. It might be a little bit of extra work on the front side, but the results that you get on the backside from putting that work in up front really makes a difference. And you can use tools. We use a product, or we can provide a product called Keeper, which is an organizational enterprise level password management tool. And it allows you to very easily do kind of single sign-on, one point access for passwords. You can use an administrator feature within it to assign a random password to every single person in your organization, and then provide that password associated with an application. So, for example, I, as the administrator, can use the establish random password feature. It goes ahead and assigns that random, could be a 15 character password to Matt, and then Matt uses that to log into IDS. And then I build that for every single one in there. And the beauty part of it is that Matt never knows his own password. He goes to Keeper, he does his one-time authentication, biometric, whatever it might be, logs into the tool, and then that tool associates that employee's interaction with all of their assigned applications. So let's say you don't want somebody to be able to get into your servicing software. You just don't assign them a password and username to access that thing through the Keeper system. So there's that one window that allows you to assign all that up front, and then there you go. And then when somebody leaves your organization, you just single key, delete that person from your system. That password is gone, and they'll never have access to it again. So those types of tools really kind of help to make that process a whole lot easier.
I always thought that the best possible password would be 8 asterisks, because then it would look like you had masked your password. So
There
I
you
didn't
go.
I didn't know if anybody would ever guess that one. Boyd, so legal question for you. If a
Sure.
dealer is hacked, what are their legal obligations today?
You have an obligation to disclose, right? So there's
To who?
to your customers, right?
Okay.
So you and to regulators, right? So it, when I was growing up, when I started driving, my mom would say, look left and right at the green lights too, right? You can be right and dead at the same time.
Huh.
Okay. Right. And it's 100% right. If you think purely technically, which a lot of lawyers do, they don't think about the business applications of these things, right? You're going to miss the opportunity here, right, to do the right thing and to maintain face, which is really what you want to do at the end of the day, because you figure, you know what, maybe I've got insurance, maybe we can handle this breach, we can internally we can get this under control. But the moment you lose, right, the confidence of your customers, there's the big hit, right? And of course, then there's the dealing with regulators, dealing with the law, the legal. So what do you have to do in case of a data breach? The laws are you're going to have jurisdiction by jurisdiction kind of regulations associated with this. There's federal regulations, but you need to timely respond, right, to that. You need to timely notify all of the involved stakeholders, right? And then you need to get the proper regulatory bodies involved in helping you address that issue. When the clock starts ticking, every single minute counts, and every single minute counts against you. And I will say this, by the way, also, one of the big things with consumer data that we found, and lawyers are clever, you got to give it to them, okay? I'm not necessarily me, but a lot of lawyers use data breaches as a backdoor to, did you have authorization for the data that was breached, right? And so you want to make sure you have authorization over that data. I want to also just kind of say this too. In our consultations with larger enterprise clients, what you see is a shift to a paradigm where they understand that the intelligence is the product. If you're still operating under the idea that what you're selling at the end of the day is just a boat or a bike or a whatever it happens to be, you're missing the big picture here. Your footing is off. The intelligence is the product. Why are they after you? Why are these hackers after you, Matt? Why are they after the dealer?
Because of the data that the dealer has,
If they so
name of the people and the financial information that's attached to each of those individuals.
they
Birth date, Social
understand,
Security.
right? They
Yep.
understand the value of that data, right? So we're having this conversation and they have a tech guy on one of these calls and he actually says it's so interesting because what we're talking about creating is a paradigm here that has only and exclusively been used by scammers. He says, this is the shift, is that people are starting to understand that their business is actually an operation for deriving signal and structuring that signal into intelligence. And it's the intelligence which is valuable, not so much, of course, the transactions. When you approach your business that way, you start thinking very, very differently about how you're managing your data, about how you're managing interactions and transactions.
I think what's kind of interesting to me on the nerdy side too is that, just like we, have a subscription model for Lightspeed or a website or Office 365, now you don't even have to be an excellent programmer. You can go out and reach out on the dark web and pay somebody $100 a month to rent or utilize their software that, then you just give it all the people you want it to go out and try to breach. So it's some of these hackers now are selling their own software to help people to hack.
That's not a
Uh,
new thing, but yeah, it's definitely exploding. Yep.
so it's been more than 2 years ago now since CDK was hacked, and I'm sure that the majority of dealers were aware that CDK provided not half, but close to half of the DMSs that auto dealers utilized. They were hacked. They were down for 2 to 5 weeks, depending on where you were. And I think one of the things that a lot of people never really thought about was that everyone said, okay, well, CDK was hacked. They're the ones who got in trouble. They're the ones who were responsible. But then there's been a whole onslaught post that of attorneys who went after the dealers who were utilizing CDK software with the premise that you had the opportunity to pick Reynolds or CDK. You didn't do your background research. You didn't pick a company that had good data privacy practices in place. And now dealers are getting sued over that. So how
Yeah.
does a dealer who, we've got relationships sometimes with 10, 20, 30 different people. How do we one, not only mitigate our exposure, but how do dealers who are not used to understanding what some of the terminology in those contracts is, how do we make good decisions?
That's a really, really good question. That's a really good question because it's not something people think about. Let me tell you how lawyers work. Lawyers work like this. We're going to find one, not we, all right, but lawyers are going to find one point they can, just like a scammer, okay? They're going to find something they can exploit, and then they're going to go and try to attach anybody and everybody who might be associated, okay, to maximize the likelihood that what happens, right? They win a big lawsuit or they get a big settlement, right? That's how it works. So you shouldn't be surprised when they go reaching for another dollar here and there, and they're absolutely going to pull you in. They're going to attach you. They're going to find a way, right, to suck you in. And so you got to have you got to have your world in order. And this is again why I say, and I'm not trying to be a broken record, but if your posture is reactive and it's protective only, you're really not only missing the opportunity, obviously, to do really amazing things with that data, right? But you're putting yourself in a position where you will have done the least amount required. And I guarantee you, those lawyers are going to find a way to exploit that. They're good at it.
So
You have, that was really one last thing. We say all of the time, please review your vendor contracts. And if you don't understand the terminology, hire an attorney who does and somebody who can interpret it for you. You know, if you, I can't think of one example of a dealership that we've worked with that had done an inventory of their agreements and understood what they had agreed to and understood how those vendors were taking that information and using that information. Not one.
I think, while we're talking about this, and it was kind of on my list of questions here, but I think one of the things that a lot of dealers are not really aware of, and I'm not going to call anybody out, but dealers know that today we've got lots of vendors in our industry who want to add widgets and tools to our
Oh,
websites, or they want to have branded pages. And what a lot of dealers don't recognize is that when you put that tool on your website, you're not just giving that brand access to the customers who are looking at that brand on your website. They're getting access to 100% of the leads that come in on your website. So you could be advertising for brand Z. Brand C could be your most profitable brand, but brand P sees that brand C got an email lead, and now they're reaching out to that customer and saying, "Hey, we'll give you $1,500 off and potentially send you to another dealer who maybe has that product in stock." And I'm just amazed at the number of dealers who are just openly allowing these vendors to access their websites in their ecosystem.
let me give you a great example, right, of the difference in posture, okay, and how we act, right? On one hand, you're purely protective in nature. You're thinking, I'm going to do the least amount that I have to do in order to be able to remain compliant. When somebody comes up, they're going to see a banner and they're going to walk away because that's what they're looking for. Okay, here's what you didn't do. Real life example. Just last week, did an audit, right, for a dealer. Turns out they had 75 uncategorized cookies. They didn't even know where these things came from. It was one of these cases exactly, right? So we had to do the job of going and finding out, right, which vendors they were working with, were responsible for those. They had no idea they were there. Okay. Now, would they have understood what was on their website if they were really thinking about the data is the product? If the intelligence is the product they're generating, that they're paying to generate? No, their whole approach to that would be, we want to be in absolute control over the flow of this data. We want to be in absolute control of what happens to this so that we're maximizing ROI from that. Again, it's a different perspective, a difference of approach. This happens all the time. What you just said is incredibly common.
And Mark, to kind of go back to one of the services within the Accelerate to Compliance suite of solutions is we have a vendor risk management portion of our solution. And that's kind of where we start, is with that discussion of, what do we mean by risk due diligence? What products or what tools do you need to collect from what vendors in order to have that body of information to make good decisions, um, with an acknowledgement that sometimes the person who is the sales manager is also the IT manager, is also the physical security manager, is also the person that's responsible for cleaning the toilets, right? So our dealerships are filled with people that wear multiple hats. So making that process structured and understandable and having documentation that helps you to define what it is that you're going to do as an organization is a good foundational place to start.
I apologize to anyone who needed to break out of here right at an hour. We are going to run just a little bit long, but we'll make a recording of this available so that you can come back and watch the last piece if you had to drop out of here. But Tony had a question. He said, "So what product service is A2C offering to help dealers utilize to utilize their customer and data to obtain correct permission?" I guess would
Yes.
be the right way to word that.
So Privacy Pillar, right? I'm with Privacy Pillar and partner of A2C. Privacy Pillar offers what we just generally call cookie consent management, okay, which is that cookie banner and all the consent management functions related to that, PII and sensitive data consent management, and the data subject access request management that we discussed earlier. We also provide, we can do gap analyses, we can do data mapping, all of that stuff we can do. But the important thing about Privacy Pillar, big thing that's differentiated us is really the fact that we have a team of experts on our side. And in fact, we have lawyers like myself who are actually directly interfacing with the clients, who can understand their business, understand right how their business needs to comport with the law, educate the clients, and then align, and this is the big thing, align the product, the solution with your operations. This is what we find is, our number one referral is our clients of other solutions who find out that those solutions aren't comporting to the operations of their business. They're non-functional, these types of things, because those businesses would sell a solution and they'd leave Matt said, the janitor / IT guy, right, with the job of actually setting this stuff up. And he had no idea really what to do or how to do it. We hold their hand, right? We make sure that this is properly set up from the beginning, every step of the way.
And then that data then is as Boyd had described earlier, it's clean and it's far more valuable. So the things that you now have to share with your CRM or any other types of marketing efforts that you might have, customer service support, warranty support, whatever it might be, is going to be clean, it's going to be accurate, and it's going to be the stuff that you've been given permission to share.
Your topic on the banner, and you're asking a consumer to opt in or opt out and then ignoring what they're actually saying. I mean, how do you work with, all the time we've got not just one person in a dealership who's saying, yeah, you can do this to my website, or you can add this garbage widget to my website. How do you make sure that once you've got that on a dealer's website, that they continue to remain compliant, that somebody isn't putting a Facebook pixel or adding a TikTok widget that maybe is going to not comply with that banner?
So this is a very important point, right? It is entirely the dealership's responsibility to make sure that what they're representing to their customers, right, is a reflection of their operations, of what they're doing. Okay. On the other hand, we do regularly go back and review our clients' websites. We just do soft audits, right? So we run a scan on the website, see how many cookies are there, how many of them, are there now that weren't there before, aren't categorized, need to be categorized. We reach back out to the client and say, hey, listen, let's hop on a call together and let's get aligned here. What we find, you made a really, really great point earlier, Mark, right, is that they're working with so many different vendors. They're working with so many different people in the organization. One person doesn't know what the other person's doing, right? The person who may be tasked with actually keeping these things in alignment may not understand that the situation's changed, right? And so it's an ongoing task. Matt said earlier, right? It's not a destination, it's a journey. It's 100% right. But you have to just kind of habituate paying attention and making sure these things are aligned. And the other thing I want to say is we don't charge for this, but we do privacy policy audits as well. Okay, so we will look through your privacy policy and make suggestions to changes that you need to make that policy in order to get that something aligned. One of the things that we do in partnership with A2C is we do free full audits of websites. So if somebody is interested, whether or not that they've got, they're in order, if their solution that they're paying for now works or doesn't work or such, we'll do a free audit, right, with no pressure whatsoever to entertain buying our solution or anything like that.
Mr. Graves asked a question, what level of security does A2C maintain, or what level do you recommend for vendors providing services to the dealerships?
Level of security. Well, it really depends on the level of customer interaction you have, the complexity of your organization, so on and all of those different things. There's no such thing as a one size fits all. We have, and I don't know if we're basically CMMC level 1 to 2 is where we operate within Accelerate to Compliance. If you're familiar with the cyber maturity model piece that the federal government puts in, we're a bridge between 1 and 2. That's where Accelerate to Compliance generally operates. Most dealerships are probably good at a CMMC level 1, which means that you have things that you have advanced firewall protection, you have persistent endpoint monitoring, you do regular penetration testing, you have regular employee training to include phishing simulation and so on and so forth. You have regular security audits, not only of your digital systems, but of your operational and administrative systems. So that type of review. You have robust policies and procedures that are regularly reviewed and updated and shared with your employees so that everybody understands what you expect of them. Those are some of the basic components of that CMMC level one. There's a whole laundry list of stuff, and we can certainly get in and kind of do that crosswalk with a dealership if they're interested in kind of seeing where they fall within that matrix. Hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, if it doesn't, Mr. Graves, if you just want to add some more to that, be happy to dig deeper into it. When a dealer is compromised, and I know small dealers to big dealers is probably a wide variance of answers here, but what ultimately do you see as kind of the financial and business impact that happens?
Well, the first part of it is usually the general turmoil that occurs when an incident is first discovered. It could be as inane as, oh my God, we got a notification that we've had a higher level of exfiltration of information, right? It might not stop operations, but it causes, that internal churn, and more people have to be focused on why this is occurring. If you have a managed service provider, you're going to, kind of engage a higher level of support that's required to determine that. If you have something, we'll go back to the CDK breach that actually shuts down your organization, think about the amount of revenue that you're losing in a business day when you can't do business. And that's not just the revenue that comes in, but the employees, right? Are you laying people off, or are you paying people? What's going on? How do you do that? Then you'll have long-term reputational damage that you might have to repair. And I think, when Boyd talked about, being upfront and honest with your customers, here's what happened, here's what we're doing. You might not have all the information right away, but you gather the information that you can in a short period of time, and then make sure that you're informing people along the way. There's also the engagement with the entities that are going to help you through a situation. If you don't have cyber insurance, you are at a significantly high risk that your business will not reopen. Your cyber insurance provider will have a whole laundry list of things that you have to do in order to be eligible to submit or to be rewarded a claim. They can work along with us. We've worked with insurance providers to make sure that the things that we're providing through our tools meet the requirements of the insurance company. And then within a cyber protection policy is almost always a response and a remediation point of contact, where they will help you with, here's what you need to do from a legal perspective when you respond, and here's what you need to do from a forensic perspective when you remediate from the event. So turmoil is a big thing. Loss of business and revenue. You might be shut down for a number of days if you don't have manual backups to systems and things of that nature. So all of that can be addressed in business continuity planning, and that is also something that we as a company can work with you. We have business planning tools that are a part of our suite.
What?
I was about to say, have a plan for it. Have your team basically trained and prepared for a breach response. It's the chaos that ensues in the aftermath of a breach, right? That ends up costing the business, right? So much time, ultimately, the reputation, money, and everything else. Have a plan. Have a protocol in place.
That was one of my last two questions left was about cyber insurance, and just to expand on that just a hair. Sorry, losing my voice. Is there a rule of thumb on how much cyber insurance a dealer should carry? Is it based on, if you do this many deals a year, you should carry $10,000 per deal, or if you got X number of customers in your database, here's how much you need?
Um, Geez, that was, one of the things that I worked on when I was with the state of Minnesota was insurance regulation. And determining the amount of coverage that you have is always probably one of the most difficult things that you can do. I don't know if there's a rule of thumb in the modern age of cyber insurance, cyber coverage. My recommendation, going back on those experiences, is sit down and work with a reputable agent and do a thorough risk analysis and a comprehensive risk analysis. It's not just equipment. So what would it cost to replace every single piece of hardware if you had a compromise that made your hardware unusable, right? If somebody bricked all of your hard drives, that's one aspect of it. Another one is your loss of business, right? So if what is your annual daily revenue, or I'm sorry, what is your average daily revenue? What are those things going to be? Is there a portion of that policy that will cover employee salary and wages? Because are you gonna, if you're gonna be down for a week, are you gonna tell everybody to stay home, or are you still gonna try to do business but in a manual perspective? So I think those calculations can best be done by sitting down and having that meeting with your carriers. Boyd,
I
do you have
think
anything else to add?
So I've actually been involved with a benefits management business that offered cyber insurance, and I think the rule was something like 10 to 20% of revenue. But Matt's point is that a rule of thumb means nothing at the end of the day because every business is different, and you have to sit down with a professional because the amount and the coverage is going to be qualified as against, right, your business, your operations, your growth. Are you more than one location, et cetera, so on and so forth.
I think you brought up a good point there too, Matt. And I think a lot of people who aren't in the software hardware world really don't think about this. But now today, somebody could put something on a computer that could actually destroy the computer. It could
Yeah.
damage the hardware that's on there. So it may not just be as easy as, okay, we got compromised, we're going to format all our hard drives and start over again. You might have to go out and buy new computers again.
Yeah, that
Last
that's
que
a, that's a real reality.
last question I got for you, kind of a two-parter here. So dealers, in the Europe, they kind of operate more globally. Here in the US, we kind of operate more at a state level. Dealer in Texas
Yeah.
has a customer who lives in California.
Mm,
And
mm.
let's say California has some, pretty strict rules in place right now, but the dealer in Texas, their website doesn't comply with that. What exposure does that dealer have in Texas? And are there any states right now that are really getting hard to work with?
California is getting
Okay.
hard to work with, but I think California, Colorado, and Connecticut are now doing joint sweeps, right? Which is interesting. It's really starting to get into motion. What you're referring to is, this is interesting because we have these conversations quite frequently. They say, "Well, I'm in Texas and I don't need to worry about anything but Texas." Okay, that's inaccurate. There's a concept in a legal concept called purposeful availment. And what that means is that if you purposely avail yourself, right, of the rights and responsibilities of a jurisdiction, okay, then you're and the benefits of that jurisdiction, you have to comply, right, with the regulations of that. Now, what does that mean? If you reach into the jurisdiction of California, and this is interesting, right, because you could say, well, somebody from California started talking to us, we didn't start talking to them. It really depends on the nature of your interactions, okay? Whether or not purposeful availment is triggered, right? And now you have to comply with the regulations of a different jurisdiction. The default assumption that you should have is that if you are willing to sell a car or a boat or a bike to somebody from a different jurisdiction, right, that you should be prepared to comply with the regulations of those jurisdictions. Okay, we can go into a whole lot of nuance about thresholds across the different jurisdictions in terms of when those regulations might be triggered. But we like to say this, right? You can be right and dead at the same time. As I said earlier, the best thing to do is just to have a globally compliant, jurisdictionally sensitive solution, right, in place so that the solution knows where somebody's coming from. It serves them up the information and according to those regulations with the right options, and even according to their browser language, for instance. If they're in California but they speak French, you know what I mean? We'll serve that up to them in French. This way, you're completely covered, right?
Cool. All right. So got a little bit of wrap up to do here. So I would like to thank everyone who attended today's webinar. It was done in conjunction with another one of our partners at the NPDA. Excited to announce that we'll be hosting weekly webinars through the rest of this spring and summer, with a few exceptions there based on my personal travel schedule. As a reminder, the NPDA is not just here to support our member dealers, but also the entire industry. If you are a current member, then thanks for supporting the organization. If you're not a member, then consider joining. And some of you might ask, well, what am I getting for my investment? Consider the following. Next Tuesday, one of the most common questions that I'm getting right now is what's going on with the FTC. Next Tuesday, the NPDA will be hosting a webinar with our legal counsel, another attorney, Balavia and Blatt, who's going to talk about how the recent ruling by the FTC against auto dealers is impacting powersports dealers, what our exposure is, and some things that dealers can do to protect themselves. And then also, if you're not aware of this, the NPDA has a big initiative this year, working to get the OEs to include freight and setup charges above the line. So included within MSRP to mitigate some of these issues that we're having with the FTC right now. Those are just two of the many things that the NPDA is working on. So if you're not a member of the NPDA, it's as you can see on the screen, it's pretty cheap to become a member, and we would really appreciate your support of the organization and all that we are doing. So I appreciate Matt and Boyd taking the time to put on this presentation for everybody who attended today. Do you two have any closing comments before we wrap things up and move on to the rest of our day?
I just want everybody to know that you do not have to be a client of Accelerate to Compliance to reach out to us and ask questions. My contact information is readily available on the website. You can call us at our support line, and we are more than happy just to answer any questions that you might have and point you in the right direction. Even if you're not using any of our tools, that's perfectly acceptable, and we really encourage it.
I will just say something I've said a few times here, which is we're looking out for the best interest of the dealerships. You guys are in business to make money, right? And grow your businesses. The smart ones are going to be thinking about intelligence. The intelligence that they're generating is the real value, and looking for novel ways to channel that intelligence into new offerings or new ways to interact with their customers. Be thinking about that. Be thinking about it, because eventually you will. The question is whether or not you're going to be behind the curve.
Cool. With that, we'll go ahead and call it an end to the day. I hope to see everybody next Tuesday on our FTC webinar. You can sign up at the NPDA to register for that. So hope to see you all there, and hope everybody has a good finish to the week. Take care. Bye-bye.